Welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast, where we chop it up about all things past, present, and future about the game of basketball. Where facts, stats, and context reign supreme.
That is blasphemous!
Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. Get ready to learn from players, coaches, and fans from all levels of the game and see the court in a brand new way. And now, fresh off the sidelines, here's your host, John Hartofilis.
What it do, fellas, and welcome to the Big Fellas Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, JH, coming to you from New York City, the mecca of basketball. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Jim Sweeney from the ESPN 30 for 30, Playing for the Mob. We spoke about Jim's dominant playing career at Boston College, the real story behind playing for the mob, and why you have to keep playing. We've got a good one in store for you today, fellas. Episode number 45, Jim Sweeney, Playing for the Mob. Hey, Jim, what's going on?
How's it going, John? It's going great.
So before we get started, in the 30 for 30 that you did, which is obviously super interesting, you did say, I'm prepared to answer any question people ask, not just some. So I want to make sure that's how you feel. You're good and ready to go.
Go for it.
Because you had a very stellar career. What did that look like for you on the basketball court?
Sure. In high school, I went to Lawrenceville Prep. 3 out of 4 years of my high school days, we were prep school state champions in New Jersey. I was first team All-State when I was in high school in basketball, baseball, and soccer in the prep division. I got recruited by a number of schools for baseball, for soccer, and for basketball. Even though baseball was my best sport, my first love and really only love, as far as athletics, has been basketball. So I went to Boston College. Ironically, one of the BC assistant coaches, I think it was in 1976, came to see one of my teammates play. And he left to go back to Boston that evening after he offered me a scholarship instead of my teammate. And my teammate, he actually went on to play at Princeton. He was a terrific player. But, fortunately, the guy came to see him and selected me. And I loved my experience at Boston College. Started all 4 years except one game as a point guard. I was academic All-American my senior year, Naismith Hall of Fame winner, which is the same, award that Tim Hardaway, Spud Webb, Muggsy Bogues got as the best player under 6 feet in America. Our teams, my junior and senior year, were nationally ranked. Played in the ECAC, which is not around any longer. My first 3 years, my senior year, we were a charter member of the Big East Conference. So that was beyond exciting, to be a part of something that was on a launching pad and then to watch it grow shortly thereafter. However, most people remember my BC career for the fact that I testified the 1981 Boston College point shaving trial in Brooklyn, New York.
For sure, that definitely was what people remembered mostly afterwards. But during that time, you were in the 30 for 30, they said, as wholesome as a Boy Scout, the kind of guy you want your daughter to bring home, Mr. Boston College, all that great stuff. And it's crazy how that narrative could in some ways switch in some people that aren't fully read up.
Well, the narrative actually was forged. I even remember the date, February 16th, 1981. At that time, Sports Illustrated was like the Bible of sports journalism. And it was a cover story, February 16th, 1981. And SI paid the Goodfellas guy, Henry Hill, $10,000 for his story. And his stories was just riddled with holes. There was a lot of stuff that was not true. There was a lot of stuff that really never came to fruition that he talked about in the article. And he painted a very negative picture about me. And I know why he did that, because he couldn't get me to cooperate with him. So that really became the story, the narrative for a number of years. And because I had agreed to testify at the BC, point shaving trial, the prosecutor said, we want you to be quiet. We don't want this news or your story to get out there. So I was really mute until, I went to the trial. So unfortunately, that had really colored people's opinions of me. I was never charged, never offered, immunity for my testimony. But it was an incredible experience that really steeled me for the rest of my life. It made me grow up. As you said, I was painted as the good old boy, the choir boy, and maybe a little on the naive side. But it wizened me. It toughened me up, and it prepared me it was an incredible life lesson. I wouldn't want to go through it again. I wouldn't want to place that onus or burden on anybody else. but I lived through it. I had my wife, I had my family, I had, my friends, and I look back on it and I say, wow, can't believe that happened. But that's water under the bridge, 40 years ago, that's way downstream.
You've called that day, February 16th, 1981, your Pearl Harbor Day before, because I can imagine.
Yeah, that's right. I did.
Yep. You've always wanted to be in Sports Illustrated for other reasons, and then you're in there for all the wrong reasons, and that obviously must be crushing.
I was in Sports Illustrated when I got the Naismith Award. So that was the second time I was in SI.
Oh, so you had been in there before. That's awesome.
Yeah, the article was about that big. You needed a magnifying glass and a GPS to find it.
Yep. This is the cover of Sports Illustrated. That's a whole
it is the cover story. It was an enterprise story.
Yep. For those that haven't seen the documentary and don't know your story, can you kind of just tell us the dinner story from your perspective, how it all went down?
Sure. I had a friend, he was a teammate, invite me to go to dinner. Unbeknownst to me, two of the people that I were going to meet were catalysts in the documentary. One is Henry Hill, and everybody knows Henry Hill. He was deceased, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago. He rose to fame as, the guy in Goodfellas. And he was there. I, was not expecting to meet him. I had no idea what his background was. His colleague was a guy by the name of Rocco Perla from Pittsburgh. And they were there to try and recruit us, meaning my teammate and myself, to affect the outcome of games at BC. So, unfortunately, I went and I said, yeah, I'll go along, because I could tell I was dealing with some nefarious characters. And I was frightened. And I knew they knew some stuff about me. They knew stuff about my family. They knew about my sister. They knew my wife's name, which was a real flag. It was a red flag for me, because my wife's name is Maura, M-A-U-R-A. And like nobody ever remembers her name. Everybody butchers her name. So, I had left that hotel room where we were supposed to go to dinner. We never had dinner, never went out to dinner. And I went back to BC just like I was a kid at the time, a young man, hoping and praying that it would go away, but it didn't. And it continued to follow me.
For sure. And then obviously threats, whether it's playing basketball with a broken arm or the story about
the threats were real.
Yep, they're very real.
And even the threat that was made to me that night at the Boston Airport Hilton, when I first met this guy, Henry Hill and Rocco Perla, he says, if you don't cooperate, do you want to wind up in the Boston Harbor wearing cement shoes? I know that sounds like it's almost made up, that it's comical that you would see it in a mafia, comedy scene, but that's exactly what he said.
It sounds like it's from there, but that's because it is.
The guy that was the person behind the scenes that I guess had to have approved this thing that they were doing, his name is Jimmy the Gent Burke. Just Google him. I mean, he's been dead for 10 or 15 years, but he was the guy behind the Lufthansa heist, which at the time was the largest cash burglary or heist in the history of the United States. And after, I think it was for $5 million. And after the Lufthansa heist, there were over 10 people that Jimmy the Gent Burke and his team convinced to be a part of the heist. They eventually disappeared one at a time. And a lot of them were found many years later. Their bodies or the bones were found behind this place called Robert's Tavern in Queens. And that was a place owned by Jimmy the Gent Burke. So it's not like we were dealing with some, pretty solid, upstanding business people. We were dealing with the mob.
Oh, 100%. And not only were you dealing with them, you were playing for them in a sense, in terms of the title of the ESPN 30 for 30. And the 30 for 30 goes through a lot of the games. And the one thing which I thought was really fascinating, how you were supposed to have a really close game with Providence and then end up blowing them out.
I particularly had a really good game. I know I scored in double figures, had a lot of assists, had a bunch of steals. And I guess the pressure that they were exerting on us was not to throw the game, to shave points, which meant, keep it within, I don't know. I don't know that, I don't recall the exact numbers, but say 2 to 5 points. But we blew them out, as you said. So, they had a couple of their representatives at the game. So when we were leaving the court to go down the steps at the old Roberts Arena at Boston College, one of the guys was just pointing at me. And I couldn't hear what he was saying. I could just hear some profanity, but he was pointing at me. And that really affected me. I mean, I was frightened, extremely frightened. And I had no idea what to expect over the next couple of days.
Of course, definitely a terrible situation to be in. And for those listeners that maybe don't understand what point shaving is, can you kind of describe that a little bit?
Keeping the outcome of a game underneath certain points. So point shaving is involved and the betting line is like 10 points. And if you keep it under 10 points, say 9 or 8, that means you were successful at shaving points. But if it was over 10, like 11 or 12, then you were unsuccessful. And it all has to do with how people place their bets.
So in terms of the actual documentary itself, how did that whole idea kind of get started? Who kind of approached you and said, we'd love to hear your side of what happened?
The guy that approached me, his name is Joe Levine, and he's a documentarian. He used to be doing documentaries at HBO Sports, and he was from Trenton, New Jersey, and that's where I grew up. We're the exact same age. We went to rival prep schools. We didn't know each other, but he was always fascinated with the story, and he knew a lot of people that I knew growing up and said, I'd like to do a story one day. And he contacted me. I was visiting my family in Trenton, New Jersey at the time, and his call came in, and I agreed to meet with him. I think I met with him 2 days later in New York City when he was still working at HBO, and originally it was going to be an HBO documentary, and he couldn't get the thing greenlit. So then when he went, he didn't go to ESPN. He's an independent filmmaker. So they sold or licensed the rights with ESPN to do the documentary.
Was there anything kind of omitted from there, maybe because of time constraints, that you would like to add that, you think could have added to the story?
Oh, absolutely. With certainty, it was my relationship with the coach. I really didn't have confidence in my personal relationship with him to go to him in confidence and say, this is what had transpired. I need your help here. College basketball or college athletics in general is really interesting in that very few stories are told about the coaches and how they could dictate the lives of young men, have influence over a program. And coaches want their own players. I was not my coach's recruit. Coincidentally, when I was in high school, the number one place where I wanted to go was Lafayette College. And Dr. Tom Davis was the coach at Lafayette College at the time. And this is before the super conferences, the mega programs. And Lafayette was always nationally ranked. They were about an hour from my house. And I wanted to go there, to play for him because I had seen them play. My dad would always, we jump on the train in Trenton. We'd go to the Palestra to watch, college basketball. We'd go to the Garden in New York, to watch college basketball. And I liked Lafayette. And Davis said I could never play for him there, and he didn't recruit me. So lo and behold, after the end of my freshman year at BC, there was a change in the coaching ranks, and Davis, comes to be the coach at BC. And, I do want to go on record and say he was a fabulous coach. I mean, he was just incredible about, his awareness of the game management. He just understood how to get the best ability out of his players. But when he showed up, he told me, he said, you couldn't play for me at Lafayette. You'll never be able to play for me at Boston College.
Oh,
so I loved Boston College. I still do to this day. I have lifelong friends, my roommates, that I lived with for several years in college. We get together every summer down the Jersey Shore, for a weekend. So, I had already made roots at BC, but I wasn't going to give up my scholarship. He wanted my scholarship. And he thought other players that he was going to recruit would be able to supplant me. And I started every game but one my freshman year. And during my sophomore, junior, and senior years, I started every game. But his, questioning my ability or my athleticism actually propelled me. It worked the exact opposite of what he was hoping to accomplish, was to get me to, voluntarily give up my scholarship so he had another scholarship. But that happens a lot more than people would think, in basketball or football, at Division I or NCAA programs. And that's what he wanted to do. But it really motivated me to become a better player.
Sure. And it's interesting because I didn't know about the whole Lafayette thing. I heard you talk about the coaching change before and how you weren't comfortable bringing the problem to him, but I had no idea that it was something that even preceded your days at Boston College in terms of that relationship. Which
I wish that were in there. And there was a second thing that was not in there. There was a gentleman. I had a roommate when I was a freshman in college, and he got mono and had to leave for the rest of the semester. So one of my friends on the team, Rick Kuhn, had asked me if this guy, George from Pittsburgh, could stay with me for a few days. He was coming to visit. I said, sure, no problem. And the guy was a great roommate. I mean, he was older, which I questioned that. Why is he older? How come he doesn't have a job? He's older than a college student, but he was the perfect gentleman as a roommate. I mean, he cleaned up after himself, never caused me any problems whatsoever. He was actually fun to be around. And what I find out a couple of years later is that he was shot and killed because of his involvement with the Pittsburgh mob. Now, I can't cite specifics or particulars like when and where and who killed him. I was hoping that the people that were doing the documentary for ESPN would have found that out on their own, but they didn't. A couple of my teammates actually corroborated the fact that he was shot and killed because they heard that, firsthand from Rick Kuhn. So I think that would have been something that would have been really important to add to the documentary, because that would have shown, my state of mind, when I was going through this.
I heard you mention that in a podcast interview, and I thought that was a super interesting thing to ask you about, because that it really brings into light how real those threats were and how real the fear was for you.
Yeah, some people have said to me, well, how do you know that people will actually follow through on their threats? And I said, I don't know.
Exhibit A, B, C, D. That's probably how.
Now, I told people, winding back the clock after we talked about in 1979, a game with Providence, or maybe it was 78, a game with Providence. And I had a really good game, scored in double figures, played a majority of the game, had a lot of assist and steals. That's when two representatives from the Pittsburgh mob were waiting. They were waiting for me to come so they can make eye contact with me before we went down the stairs to our locker rooms, and they were pointing at me. That shook me up. So for the next week, it was cold at that time. It was winter. And I actually changed what I wore when I left my apartment. And then when I came back, I had this crazy bubble jacket. I looked like the Michelin Man. My mom insisted, that she buy this jacket for me when I went to BC because it's going to be colder there. And she was right. So one side was blue, one side was tan. I would turn it inside out. I'd wear a ball cap, then I'd wear a stocking cap. Then I'd wear like a hoodie. Was I a little too apprehensive? Was I paranoid? Yeah, maybe, but the threat was real. And when you're 20 years old, demons can speak to you at that time.
Definitely something to take precautionary measures about when you've heard even in the news about things that have happened in other places with organized crime. So definitely, Obviously it's difficult to be in a situation where you don't feel like you can ask for help. When Rick Kuhn put the $500 in your chest and said you're involved whether you like it or not, I'm curious to hear how helpless you felt.
I think Rick regrets it to this day. He actually had a pretty kind heart, a very kind heart. I liked him. And unfortunately, I don't know what exactly he did, but he got wrapped up on this. I'm sure he has regrets. I only wish him the best. It's something that I'm sure he would say, I can't believe I did that, or I should have avoided that. But when he gave me the money, pushed it in my chest and walked away, I'm thinking, got to pick it up. What's going to happen if somebody walks into the locker room after me and questions this? Because it was 5 $100 bills. So I shared it with two of my roommates. And it was interesting. One said, you need to go to the athletic director right away. And the other says, you better keep your mouth shut, put your head down, and just get through this thing on your own. And we talk about this, as I mentioned, I'm still buddies with these guys and all the other guys that I lived with and palled around with when I was in college. Every single summer at the Jersey Shore, we relived the experience.
I'm sure when an experience you have in college ends up in a 30 for 30, it's definitely something you guys talk about with each other.
Yeah.
I really hope none of the things that I've done in college ever make it to a 30 for 30. I'm only kidding. After all this stuff happens in college, what happened for you afterwards? Was it professional basketball?
I played for a brief season in Sweden. Quite honestly, I didn't like. And I didn't even know that FBI was investigating what had happened at Boston College when I was in Europe. I had a really good season for a Swedish team. I wasn't a scorer in college. I was a point guard, a playmaker, but I was a scorer when I got to Sweden. And I loved it. It was like, I was emancipated from the shackles of not being able to shoot. And they expected me to shoot and score when I was in Sweden. And then also my wife, I knew that I wanted to get married, and I know that she was saddened that I was away. So I didn't go back after I had come home. And, I lived in northern New Jersey at the time. My wife and I both worked together. She was in law school, but she was working part-time at an executive search firm where I had worked. And then the stuff hit with the BC thing. And it was not anything like it would have been today. I mean, people would follow me. They'd show up. If I was in the grocery store, somebody would look for an interview or stop me and ask me a question. And the press was always lurking somewhere, but not to the extent that you would have found today when you have like 24/7 nonstop media, not just news, but sports news. Even though this was going on, I played in like every league in northern New Jersey. And people would say, aren't you the guy that I just saw in Sports Illustrated? I said, yeah. And, they said they wanted to talk about it at that time. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't. When it's over and when I get the green light, from the FBI in Brooklyn, I'd be happy to talk to you about it, but I can't talk right now. Only because I gave my word to the people at the FBI that I wouldn't do it, and I didn't.
So, I mean, it's super interesting too that you obviously kept on playing even well after those years.
Never
for senior
stopped.
college days. Yep. And that's what I want to ask you about, because I'm not sure if you saw the Uncle Drew movie with Kyrie Irving, but there's a quote in there that I thought was really interesting, that it's, you don't stop playing because you get old because you stop playing. I don't know if you've ever heard that before and what you think about that. So
I'm in total agreement with it. And, I play what's called masters basketball or senior basketball or veterans basketball. It's very organized in the United States and even better organized outside the United States. And our motto is add years to your life by adding life to your years, play masters hoops. And everywhere we go, I've played in over 20 countries and over 100 different masters basketball tournaments since 2009. And everyone says that once you stop for a while, like a year or two, you really can't ever get that back. Your skills, your athleticism, your endurance, your fitness is just, because of nature, is going to erode, but it erodes at a more rapid pace if you take a time off, like a year or two off from the game. And the guys that try to come back, I always tell them, if you want to make a run coming back and you haven't played in a few years, play one game at a time for a week, then play 2 games at a time for a week, then 3 games, and make sure you drink a lot of water and stretch, because they invariably pop a calf muscle, pull a groin, twist the knee, is because your body's just not accustomed, to that kind of activity if you've been out of the loop for so long.
Of course. And do you do a lot of stretching, icing to kind of keep yourself ready?
I don't do icing, but I stretch all the time. I stretch before I play, and I even stretch afterwards, but I don't do the icing. I don't do supplements. The only, I guess, protective equipment I've ever worn has been a calf sleeve. I popped my calf like 8 or 10 years ago. I wore that thing for a year. I come back from playing ball. My wife refused to allow me to bring the thing into the house. If you could bleach that thing or wash it, it still smelled like a smelly locker room. So I had to leave it downstairs in the garage. But no, I don't do any of the supplements. I don't, the snake oil creams. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. I'm just fortunate that I really haven't had any injuries.
On that note of how you've always been playing, talk about not just that you've been playing, but how competitive this league is, because you're a 5-time world champion, 2-time Pan Am champion, 8-time USA national champion, and you're in the Hall of Fame for this Masters Basketball League. So can you talk about what, it's not just you guys playing for just to play. There's also a competition aspect in there too.
Yeah, well, I do have my local crew here in Clearwater, Florida, where I live. And they're guys that, we've played together, some of us, for almost 35 years. And then we try, every year there'll be a new one person would fall out, a new guy would come in, and it's organized pickup. We don't play in any leagues anymore. It's just organized pickup where we play 5 or 6 great games, 3 times a week, get a good sweat in. But that prepares us for the tournaments. And there's tournaments that I play in both in the United States as well as internationally. In the United States, and coincidentally, I'm wearing a shirt. It says Tampa Bay Masters on it. That's the biggest Masters basketball tournament in the United States, and it's based here in the Tampa Bay area where I live in Clearwater, Florida. And earlier this year, we set the record. We had 450 players from 31 states. The age groups start at 40 and go up to 70, and they go in 5-year increments. Because when you play, when you get older, it's like the bell curve of life. Goes in a different direction, but it's still the bell curve of life. Where when you're younger, you don't want a 16-year-old playing against an 11-year-old. When you get older, you don't want a 65-year-old guy playing in a game against a 50-year-old, because it's just Mother Nature, kicks in, and you're, as I mentioned previously, your athleticism, your endurance, your fitness, it all starts to erode. But I think there's maybe 10 USA Masters basketball tournaments. Before our call, I mentioned there's a great tournament in New York City. It's called the New York City Masters Experience. And it's every August, not this August because of COVID, but it's been every August for the last half dozen years or so. And my friend La Woods, he's the guy that runs the tournament. And we played at your college, Baruch College. We played at Columbia. We played at the Rucker Park. We played in rec centers in Queens. We played all over the city. And they're incredible players. And that they're only divisions of 50 plus, so 50-year-olds and older, and 60 and older. But they're the best that you can find. They come out of the woodwork in New York City, to play in these tournaments. And there's guys that actually come to watch, like Tiny Archibald, Earl of Pro Monroe comes to watch, Joe the Destroyer Hammond, an old playground legend, from the Rucker Park. He's been out there. So in New York, that's a fabulous, it's like a day and a half long tournament. But the other tournaments in Chicago, Indianapolis, Coral Springs, Florida, Las Vegas, St. George's, Utah, Detroit, Chicago, they're weekend long tournaments. And you have different teams come from different areas of the United States. Like Chicago is predominantly teams from the Midwest. The New York City Masters experience is almost everybody from the Northeast. The Tampa Bay Masters is guys from all over the country. The Masters Basketball Association, NBA National Tournament in Coral Springs, Florida, guys from all over the country. And in the younger divisions, you've had over the years, Billy Thompson, an NCAA champion, a two-time NBA champion, Timmy Hardaway, Ronnie Cycli, Easy Eddie Pinkney, Glenn Rice, who's the announcer, Chris Carter, Randy Moss. They've all played in these tournaments. So
really,
it draws more than just basketball players. And you've really got to be in shape to play them. And there's not a lot of NBA players necessarily that want to play in the tournaments because their bodies are so worn from all that they've played over the years, where there's other guys that are late bloomers in life and they don't smoke, they don't drink, they take care of their weight, they're always fit, they haven't succumbed to injuries, and they could be more skilled, more fit, more athletic at an advanced age in life than some of the former NBA players. Plus there's ego involved, and I won't go there. But that's on the domestic circuit. Internationally, I'm really fortunate. I'm the head of the United States for FIMBA and on the international board. And FIMBA is an acronym for Federation International Masters Basketball. It's like FIBA is for, global basketball, but this is the M. It's a different organization that's for masters or seniors or veterans. We're not associated with FIMBA. We have a nice working relationship. They're very much aware of us. Obviously, we're aware of them. FIMBA's been around since 1991. They now have individual representatives like me or country heads in 47 different countries. So what I do is I look to recruit players and organize teams to participate in FIMBA tournaments. And I've played in FIMBA tournaments a couple times in Brazil, Costa Rica, Japan, Finland last year. We're one of our world championships we got there. Czech Republic a couple times, Serbia several times, Costa Rica, Italy, Greece. So it's the best, we call it age equivalent competition in the world. And you get, especially internationally, you're going to get former Olympians, former national team players, European pros, and it's competitive. I mean, you're not going to get like alley-oop passes or slam dunking. Maybe the 40s will still do it, some of the 45s, but not 50 and older. But the tournaments are big. People said, well, it can't be that big. Our largest event we've ever had was in Italy a couple of years ago. It was one of our world championships. We had 367 teams from 51 countries that played 1,118 games in 22 venues in 9 days. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And the next world championship we're going to have is in the NBA bubble at the ESPN Wide World of Sports Complex in Orlando. And we want to set the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest Masters basketball tournament in the world. And we don't know yet how badly COVID's going to impact us. Originally we said and estimated we want to have 500 teams. I think we'd be ecstatic if we got 400 teams. We'd be very happy if we got 300 to 350 teams. But that's set for 2022. And then next year, FIMBA's got tournaments, God willing, in Argentina, the island of Guadeloupe, in the Caribbean, Spain, potentially in Dubai, and potentially in one Asian host city to be determined.
When you said Randy Moss, that's obviously dunking when it comes to like the athleticism in that 40 and up division. I'd imagine he does a good deal of that in that league.
I've seen him at the tournaments, a couple tournaments. I've never seen him play.
Okay.
But a guy that's really athletic is Chris Carter. I mean, he's got to be 55 now. He's crazy athletic. Yep. And other guys like Eddie Pinkney, he got big. Billy Thompson, he got big, but he's got mad skills. He's 6'9", he's smart. and he's a winner, and he's going to dominate.
So guys like Earl the Pearl and Tiny Archibald, they come and watch it. They've never even considered playing in that?
No, I don't think they would ever consider it. As a matter of fact, Earl of Pearl Monroe is my favorite player as a kid growing up. Obviously, I grew up in New Jersey. New York was only an hour and 15 minutes away by train. And the first time I had met Black Jesus, that's Earl Monroe, that's his nickname, is I was at Columbia University. And it was in between games. I was sitting in the corner and I was stretching. And I hear somebody trying to push on the doors to get into the gym. And I'm thinking, I wonder who it is. So I open it up, and then a cane, like a 3-pronged cane, comes through the door to hold it open. And I open it up, and I came face to face with Black Jesus. Yeah, I was so excited. I mean, I'm like, I don't know, late 50s at the time. And I said, Earl, how are you? And he's, oh, man. And we didn't know each other. And he said, just had another had a knee replacement. And he said, can you get me a chair? I got him a chair in the area of the gym where I was sitting, so I wouldn't have to share him with anybody else. And I just told him, I said, Earl, I see you were my favorite player, really admired, your game. Obviously, it was never as good as you, never played in the league like you did. I said, but I just want to sit here and talk to you. I had my admiration for him was already high. It like skyrocketed. And then other people said, Sweeney, who are you talking to? I said, it's Earl Monroe. Next thing I knew, it was like all these people like bees, they just converged on us. That guy took every picture, asked every question, and he was just grateful to be there. And for the next 3 years in a row, he came to the New York City Masters experience, and he did the same thing. So he was like the ambassador of the tournament that included, I don't know, it was a small tournament. It was only a dozen teams or more, but it was just a fabulous experience. I'll never forget it.
It's funny. People normally tell you don't meet your role model; they'll disappoint you. But he obviously
he
exceeded.
No.
Yep, he
exceeded expectations.
Yep,
yes,
that's
he did.
great. So then off the court, I mean, you've done some really cool things with New Vision Entertainment and the character Mike. And I'd obviously love to hear about him because I looked up and he's super interesting. And I'd love to see where you're going to take that.
I do too. Mike hasn't gotten to the level or to the national prominence that I would like to see him attain. Mike, by the way, is my alter ego. I feel like he was born with me and coursing through my DNA on January 3rd, 1958. And Mike is just this witty guy that reports on sports through his own unique lens. And his real name is Michael Anthony Raffone, AKA Microphone, or simply Mike. He's a microphone, or we call him the ultimate talking head on sports, or the long-awaited microphone messiah. And where I envision Mike is on a major network or a major website, not necessarily with his own show like a SpongeBob or a Bart Simpson, but as a alter ego type character that could banter back and forth with sportscasters or real life celebrity athletes, or he could have his own. And I've written and produced, it was like 60 podcast shorts. Well, my wife and I have spent a lot of money on animation, bringing Mike to life. We once got piloted by a major network, but we didn't necessarily agree with the plans that they had for the character. I'm still talking, I'm still dancing with a couple people right now to utilize Mike, but everybody's like, hurry up and wait until COVID is over, then we could possibly do something. But over the years, I've published 40 sports comic books. They're all available on Amazon. I make a little bit of money selling the books, and I've made more money by embedding affiliate links into the books with ads for the NBA and NHL. Mike reports on all sports. I mean, he transcends all sports. He's transgenerational, and he's G-rated. So I still have hope that he'll come to fruition at the level that I expect him to be, but I won't give it up. I won't sell it. I'll license him, but I won't sell him because he's me. And I love the character, and I put so much sweat equity into the thing, and also a lot of money. Is some of these things, they just need that one opportunity. And I feel like it's still ahead of me.
Sure, I can't wait to see that opportunity happen over the next few months, years, whatever it is, to see that character come to life for you.
Thank you.
And then I also thought it was really cool, the book you just released. And what was the process of writing that?
Thanks for asking. Old School Hoops, Stories of an Aging Baller. Over the years, so many people have said to me, Sweeney, you need to write a book. I mean, you got all these experiences of different places where you've gone and traveled. And I believe I mentioned earlier, I played in over 100 Masters basketball tournaments in 20 different countries. And I write about, like the incredible destinations, that I was fortunate enough to visit, the amazing food that I found, and the awesome people that I met, all because of Masters basketball. And some of the stories are, I do cover the history of Masters basketball. It was Artis Gilmore, Sam Jones, two top 50 players of all time, in conjunction with a gentleman here in Florida, Dr. Bill Bosworth, started the Masters basketball movement in 1985 in Jacksonville, Florida. And I've been friendly with them for a number of years with Dr. Bosworth. And, I do know and I've worked with Artis and Sam over the years. And I've watched what they built with the Jacks Masters. Jacks is short for Jacksonville. And they're the people that actually birthed the Masters basketball movement. And as a result of that, and I cover it in my book, it's blossomed into tournaments in South Florida, in New York, in Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit, Las Vegas, St. George, Utah, now in California. Masters basketball then took off internationally with FIMBA. There's something called the World Masters Games, which is like the Olympics. All 29 Olympic sports are held in the World Masters Games, basketball being one of them. So I've traveled to World Masters Games tournaments to play and represent the United States in those games. And there's other tournaments around the world that all, as a result of Dr. Bill Bosworth, Artis Gilmore, and Sam Jones birthing the Masters Basketball USA movement here in Jacksonville, Florida, these things have prospered as a result of that. Unfortunately, in 2020, there's really only been one tournament. It was the Tampa Bay Masters earlier this year, and everything else got scrubbed. Yeah, we're eager and have expectation that, the old man's hoops, old school hoop circuit is going to find their way back into being first and foremost in people's minds. But I capture not only the history of the movement, but all my stories about crazy places where I've stayed and visited, crazy gyms that I played in, incredible competition because I played against some great, like Yugoslavian Olympians, Brazilian Olympians, Chilean. There's a guy in Chile. His name is Daniel Villafora. I mean, he could still play major college basketball today. He's 60. He's phenomenal. Slavko Kutnik, he's 60, 6'9". First time he ever played with us was I met him in Greece. He was 53 years old. He shoulder shook on his left, dropped his right elbow, then drop stepped and flushed with two hands on Mark Akers, who played in the NBA for 9 years, who was one of our teammates. So wow. It's a privilege to be. And then one of the highlights of Masters basketball is we ran our own little event here in Clearwater, Florida, when a bunch of teams from Brazil were visiting. And into the gym walks Oscar Schmidt. And a lot of guys that were playing with us didn't know who he was. I said, get on your phone and find out who he is. And he said, well, who is he, Sweeney? And I said, he's the Holy Hand. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, look it up on your phone. And Oscar Schmidt is the leading scorer in the history of basketball. Scored 51,000 points, 12,000 more than Kareem did in his NBA career. Now, Oscar Schmidt didn't play because he had brain surgery. But we asked him, we said, Oscar, can you just shoot for us? And he says, no problem. He went out there and he was like butter. I mean, he didn't even warm up. And he's like way out from the basket. So, one of the things that I guess Masters basketball has brought to me is a lot of joy in my life. I get to still continue playing a game that I love slowly. I get to travel with my wife and my friends, get to see all these different, places I otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to go to and still compete. And I cover all that in the book. That's what the book is about.
A must read, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on that. When you said Oscar Schmidt, I'd only heard of him once when the 1984 draft documentary, when they mentioned him, and I was like, what? Who is this guy? I looked him up a little bit more. This was years ago. I was much younger. And I thought like it's funny, like when you hear basketball stuff like that really no one knows about, but it's like most points scored ever. Like that's something you would think everyone would know, and they don't.
There's it's either 87 or 89. The Brazilian team beat the United States in the finals of the Pan Am game, and Oscar Schmidt was on that team. All of his other teammates play on the Brazilian teams that we face in these tournaments internationally that we go to.
Really?
They're still playing. They still stay together. Big Israel, the 6'11" guy, he's 60. He still dunks with two hands. This guy, Kadum, 4-time Brazilian Olympian. He's like 6'7" point guard. He still plays. He's fantastic. But they're slower. And we're quicker and faster.
When I originally read about the FIMBA thing or heard about it, I thought it was a much smaller league. But when you guys have all these hundreds of teams, it's a huge network.
Yeah, and one thing that FIMBA also does is they license the FIMBA name, and it's like code of ethics and tournament guidelines to certain events around the world. So I go to, not this November, but for 5 Novembers in a row, I'd go to Serbia for probably the best Masters tournament that I've ever played in. It's a smaller tournament. There's 70 teams, but it's from like basketball crazy teams from Bosnia, Montenegro, Greece, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Russia, and they all converge on Belgrade, Serbia for this tournament every November, except this November.
Definitely so interesting that you've had all these experiences. Just to wrap up, one last question. What's some advice that after having all these experiences, would you go back and give yourself? What's something that you think that you know now that you didn't know, let's say 40, 50 years ago?
That there's always opportunity out there for you. And don't think that because life has, like in my personal situation, based on what transpired in the early 80s with Boston College, a lot of people said, I can't believe you still play after the BC experience. And I said, why would I not? I don't have anything to be ashamed of. I'm very grateful that I'm still healthy, to be able to play. And I wasn't looking for like Masters basketball. It kind of found me with people that were older than me that, I got to be honest, I would like chuckle when I say, these guys are still playing. What, are you kidding me? And they would always say, we go to these tournaments, but we love it. And it's lifelong friendships that you make. It's people that share a common passion, that have the same love of the game. They share a bond, and you'll never be able to shake that or lose that. And even if you stop playing, it's like I've been on IR for a while with a heart arrhythmia thing. I'd still would go to the tournaments if they had them, just because they're my friends. And not just my friends that are on my team, but friends that are on the other teams that we play against, are friends that are in different age groups. It's a brotherhood. And in some cases, a sisterhood too, because in the FINVA tournaments, two-thirds of the entered teams are male and 1/3 are female. My wife is always that way. Let's just walk through every door that opens.
Yep. So important. So important to think that way.
But she is an inspirational, motivational speaker. That's what she does for a living. So it's easy for her to say that because she tells usually hundreds of people in an auditorium to do the same thing. But she says, but it works with my husband.
And yeah, Jim, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great discussion. I mean, your life story is so interesting.
I appreciate the platform, the opportunity, the questions, and thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Big Fellas Podcast. Check us out on all major social media platforms at Big Fellas Pod to join the chop up. You can also listen to us on every podcast platform on the planet. Stay tuned for the next episode, Big Fellas.